Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we finished and tested our basic, two-way chat application between a server and a single client. And this worked pretty good as we could send data back and forth from a server to a single client. However, there were some pretty glaring shortcomings, and so I want to talk about a few of them just initially here in this video, and we're going to use those for motivation for our next project. So I'm going to minimize these. I'll open these up in my terminal here so we can see the chats better. So I'll run Python chat server.py. All right, so there's our server, it's running, and then I'll run the associated client script for that. So new terminal over here, and I will run Python chat client.py. All right, perfect. So if we look here, we have a message prompt as soon as we log in. So I can say, hi, server, and then that message prompt gets sent over here. And I can say, hi, client, how are you? And we can have this, communication back and forth. However, it's kind of weird that we can only sort of send one message at a time, or at least it seems that way. So I can say, this is my message, and as soon as the client sends it, the message prompt is gone. But what if the client continues to type? So I can say I am still typing ... and then I leave it here. Well, when the server responds to this message, this is my message, the message prompt goes back to the client, and then that text appears there, which is kind of weird behavior. So I'll hit enter here, and we'll send that message. Now, what if the client lost the message prompt? What if we type and we hit enter? So I'm going to say I am typing and hit enter. All right, and I just hit enter. And so now if you look, some weird behavior is happening. So now I'm over here, and I don't know where the message prompt is going. So we kind of it looks like we sort of crashed the program, which is not that good. And we also saw, we got a bunch of errors here. We crashed that program. So we definitely don't want that behavior to occur. We also saw, I think at the end of the last video, we talked about this, that we only have two people communicating here, a server and a single client. But what if we wanted 3 or 4 or 5 people communicating? Essentially, what if we wanted more clients? Well, what we're now talking about is more of a chat room rather than a simple chat where multiple people are all together and they can all send messages fluidly, or maybe I'll say concurrently at the same time. And this is totally doable, and it's something that we are actually going to build. So in order to fix these two issues, we have to introduce a new module called the threading module. See, our problem comes from the fact that in our previous code, let's say our chat client code, so I'm in here right now, when we send a message, so if you look, we received a message. It was kind of like I think we received you are connected to the server. We received that message, and then we sent a message. So we send a message, we get the message from our user, and then we send the message. Perfect. And so once we send that message, we come back up to the top of our while loop here, and we are telling our socket here that we expect to receive another message. And essentially, this program sort of hangs until that message essentially comes in, right? The receive method, this method says, hey, wait until we get some data coming through the data stream that we can process as a message. So the tasks of sending, sending here and then receiving and then sending and receiving, they're sort of sequential in our code. And what we want instead is to have both tasks sort of running concurrently or at the same time, such that at any time our client script is looking to send a message if the user wants to send a message and receive a message if one comes in. And so we want these two processes to run at the same time. And really, the threading module can help us accomplish this. On the server side, we're going to have a similar sort of situation here. If you look, we accepted an incoming connection, and we accepted the incoming connection outside of the while loop. Well, we want to accept multiple connections. We want to connect to all of them and then receive and send information, to all of the connected clients. However, if you note, when I run just my server, and I'll run it inside of here, the server is running, the server hangs. Right here, it's waiting for a connection to come in, and only once that connection comes in, that the rest of the program will kind of run. So I can't really put this line of code inside of my while loop because it'll hang my program. So we're going to have some big issues here. However, the threading module is going to allow us to run these different portions of our code concurrently or at the same time, right? The sending and receiving of information and the accepting of new clients, we can all run in their own, we'll call them separate threads. So I think that's like a really nice overview and good motivation for what we are going to be doing here. So I'm actually going to close out of these two scripts here, and I'm going to make a new file. So file, new file, it's going to be a Python file, and I'm going to Control S and we'll save it, and I'm going to back up one level and I'm going to create a new directory. So we'll call it new directory 2, and we'll call this terminal chat. Terminal chat room we'll call it. So we're going to make a chat room that exists inside of the terminal. And so this first program that we're going to write is just all about the threading module. So I'm going to call this thread intro.py. Sure. And so we'll just import, the first thing that we have to do is import the threading module, which is going to help us run programs, kind of concurrently or at the same time. And so I'm going to actually just put some comments here right up at the top to help us understand what is happening. So I'm going to say threading allows us to speed up programs by executing multiple tasks at the same time. And then we'll say each task will run on its own thread. And then we'll say each thread can run simultaneously and share data with each other. And so that's going to be, I think really helpful for us for what we want to do if we're going to try to make a chat room. And so let's just add a little bit more here. We're going to say every thread when you start it must do something. So when you start a thread, it has to have something that it is going to do. And so we can say that, which we can define with a function. So we'll define some functions, and then when we start a thread, we'll tell the thread, hey, when you start, you're going to run this target function. So our threads will then target these functions that we are going to write. And then lastly, we'll just say when we start the threads, the target functions will be run. All right, so let's put this maybe into practice here. So how are we going to do this? So let's take a look. Let's begin by defining some basic functions. So I'm going to just define some really basic and kind of arbitrary functions. We'll call them function 1, function 2, and function 3. And each function is just going to do a simple thing. It's going to use a for loop to print out the numbers 1, 2, or 3 10 times. So I'll say def function 1, and I'll say in here for x in range of 10. I guess I'll say for I. Let's do I. Why not? For I in range. It doesn't matter, but I just like I as my iterable a little bit better. We'll say print the word 1. Okay, and then we'll say def function 2, and we'll say for I in range of 10. We'll say print the word 2, and I'm putting a space here just for formatting. It'll help us out later. And then I'll say def function 3, and we'll say for I in range of 10, print 3. All right, so some really simple functions here that are going to help us as we test how we can use the threading module. So now, as expected, if we call these functions normally, we'll call like function 1, we'll call function 2, and then we'll call function 3. So I'm going to put a comment here. If we call these functions, we see the first function call must complete before the next. Essentially, we'll say that they are executed linearly, right? They're executed in order. So let's just test this out. So we'll call function 1, then we'll call function 2, and then we'll call function 3. And so what we should see is just function 1 is going to be called, the main code is going to hang until that's done, and then function 2 will be called, the main code will hang until it's done, and then function 3 will be called. So let's run this, and hopefully we'll see 1 getting printed out. Yep, and that's exactly what looks like it's happening, right? So 1 gets printed out 10 times. When that function is done, the next one starts, 2, and then 3. Perfect. So, and maybe, I'm going to add a little bit here. I'll say this is perfect. I think we're seeing this nicely. So really, we've got a nice foundation here set up for kind of exploring what the threading module is going to do to maybe help us run these three functions not linearly like we're doing here, but rather concurrently. And I think that this is a good place to stop in this video, and we'll explore that concept in our next video. So I will see you then. Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we kind of laid the foundation for using this threading module. We wrote three kind of pretty basic functions, function 1, function 2, and function 3, where they just print out the number, the words 1, 2, or 3. And we see that when we call them down here, they're executed linearly, right, sequentially. And so that, function 1 is called, it must complete, and then function 2 is called and must complete, and then function 3 is called and it must complete until the program continues. So let's see if we can actually create some threads now to have these functions run concurrently. So what we first need to do is declare the threads using the threading module that we've imported, and then we'll pass in a target, and those targets are going to be the functions that we wrote right here, and it's these functions that will be run when the thread starts. So I'm going to put a little comment down here just for our purposes. We'll say we can execute these functions concurrently using threads. We must have a target for a thread. We'll just for a thread. Perfect. So we'll put that in there. So we'll call our first thread T1, and so I'm going to create this thread by calling the threading module, and I'll say .thread. All right, so there's our first thread, and we got to pass in some target for this first thread. So I'll say target is equal to function 1. And if you note here, when we write this here, we are just using the function name, right? We're not actually putting the parentheses here because we're not actually calling the function. We're just setting it here to be a target. So there is no parentheses here. So let's now define a second thread. So T2 is equal to threading.thread, and then we'll pass in our target. Our target is going to be function 2. And then we'll say T3, our third thread is threading.thread, and the target of this thread is function 3. All right, perfect. So let's see here, now that we have defined these threads, we need to start the thread. So we have defined them, so now we should start the thread. So to start the threads, we just call the thread, so T1.start. All right, and so I'm going to actually comment out these function calls to function 1, function 2, and function 3, and we have T1.start. So if I run this right now, thread 1 should start, and it should just print out 1. Easy. So if I then do T2.start, what will happen? So before, when we called function 1 and then function 2, we saw function 1 finished and then function 2 started. But now with threads, if we run this, you can see we are getting these things running concurrently. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So these threads are running at the same time. And of course, we can then throw in T3 and start T3. So if we run T3 now, we can see that 3 is also being printed in here. And so our 3 functions are being run concurrently rather than sequentially. Awesome. So this is really cool. Maybe this is going to give us a way to run certain parts of our programs, our chat application, like sending and receiving messages at the same exact time. A few really important things to note here, though. So threads can only be run once. So I've defined my thread T1, and so if I start it here, I can't necessarily start or call T1 again. So like if I do T1.start again, let's see what happens. Yeah, I get an error. It's a runtime error. Threads can only be started once. So, if we want to use T1 again, we essentially have to redefine T1. So I'm going to put a comment here to help us understand that. I'll say threads can only be run once. So if you want to reuse, you must redefine. All right, so we'll redefine T1 as threading.thread, and then we'll pass in our target, and so I'll pass in my target again, function 1. All right, perfect. And now I should be able to call T1.start, and then, I don't know, I'll just print a message once it's done. I'll say threading rules. So now if we run this, we should see our thread running, and then the question is, where will this maybe print statement occur? Right? So we've started a thread, and so the thread is going to run, and then where does this print statement occur? So let's run this. Oh, did I have a mistake here? Let's see. T1 is equal to threading target function 1. No attribute. So I think I have a mistake here. Let me just see what this says. Function T1 is threading dot. Oh, I put the word tread. Let me add a thread in here. So let's run this. Okay, so let's run this. And so you can see now I'm recalling thread 1, and that was not a problem. And you can see here, right, threading rules, it's getting just printed in there, right? It's just getting thrown right in there. So we're calling our first thread, our second thread, our third thread. We're redefining that thread. Everything is running as fast as it possibly can. However, you know, we might want to pause our program and wait for the threads to be done before we print maybe this final statement. You know, trying to control when our threads run and when our main code is running is something that we might want to do in the future. So to do this, we can simply kind of pause the program, the main program, until a thread is done. And so if we look here, I will come down here and I'll say, if you want to pause the main program until a thread is done, you can. So let's do that. Let's redefine T1. So we're going to call T1 again, so we have to redefine it. Threading.thread, and we'll set a target to be function 1. And now what we'll do is we'll call T1.start to start that thread, and then to essentially pause the main program until the thread is finished, we can use the join method. So I'll take my thread T1 and I'll call .join, and we'll say this pauses the main program until the thread is complete. So now what we should hopefully see is we're going to have, you know, we got lots of threads running. Maybe I will comment out some of these threads just for right now. So we'll run our thread, and then we're going to redefine it, run it again, and once that is done, at the end now, we should print threading rules. So let's see if this works, if we're pausing it correctly, and we most certainly are. So the main program was on pause until the thread had finished whatever it was trying to execute, and then we went back to running the main program. Awesome. So I think this is a nice introduction to threading, and we're going to see how we can use this threading module to really help us instill some of the concepts of a chat room that we had talked about in our earlier video. I can't wait to see you in our next video where we begin building that chat room application, and we'll see how we can have many people communicate back and forth as many clients attack or connect to a single server. So I'll see you in that next video. With the fundamentals of threading at our disposal, we now have a way for parts of our programs to run concurrently rather than sequentially. And this is going to be huge for us in trying to make a chat room app. As you can imagine, our server or client scripts are going to have to be listening for connections, receiving information, and sending information all at the same time. We can do just that with threads. So let's start with the basics on both our server and client scripts. So we're going to open up two new files here and save them in our new folder, and I'll call them server.py and client.py. So we'll make a new Python file and we'll say server side chat room, and I'll save this. We're in our terminal chat room folder, and I'll just save this as server, so server.py. And we'll make a new file here, and we'll make it a Python file, and I'll say client side chat room. Yep, perfect. And I'll save this, and I'll save this as client. So it'll be a client.py file. Excellent. So let's start with the server side. So over here, we're going to begin by importing the socket and the threading module. So we want both of them in here. So we'll say import socket and comma threading. So that will bring both of those modules in so we have access to their functionality. Next, let's define some constant variables that we are going to use across the program. So we'll say here define constants to be used. And again, I like doing this because then if we want to change these later on, all we have to do is just come to the top of our code here and we can create those changes. So the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need our local IP address, and we'll use that as the host IP. So we'll say host IP is equal to socket.getHostByName, and then in here we'll pass socket.getHostName. All right, perfect. Next, we'll need a port address. So we'll say host port is equal to let's use 1 2 3 4 5 again. We'll say 1 2 3 4 5. We'll use an encoder, so we'll say encoder is equal to UTF-8, and we'll specify a maximum byte size. So byte size, and again, we'll just arbitrarily pick 1024 right now. We are not really worried too much about that for the time being. So with those defined, let's now create our server socket, bind it to a specific IP address and port address, and then we'll begin listening for incoming connections. And so just like we have been using in the past, we're going to use the IPv4 and TCP protocols for our socket. So we'll put a comment here. We'll say create a server socket, and we will say server socket is what we'll call it, is equal to socket module.socket, and inside of here we're going to pass in our two protocols, so socket.af_inet, that's IPv4, and then socket.sockstream, there is, all capitals, there is our TCP connection. Now that we've created this socket, we need to bind it to our specific IP and port that we've specified here. So we'll say, all right, let's take that socket we just created, server socket.bind, and in here we'll pass as a tuple our host IP and our host port. All right, wonderful. And then lastly, because we are listening, we want an incoming connection, we have to listen for that incoming connection, so server socket.listen. All right, and so that looks like it is set up perfect. So the last thing that I'm going to do here is create essentially a couple of blank lists that we are going to use to store information about all of the various clients that connect to our chat room. So the first thing that we'll store is their socket information. You know how when we get a connection, we get the socket that we're as just connected. So we're going to store those in a list, and then we'll also store the name of the maybe the client that's connected. So whether it's Mike, Mary, Bob, Joe, etc. So we'll just put a comment here. We'll say create two blank lists to store connected client sockets and their names. So we'll call our first one client socket list, and that'll be initialized as a blank list, and then we'll call the next one client name list, and we'll initialize that as a blank list as well. Perfect. So these are going to be helpful for us as we kind of move forward in building out this program. So while we're here in our server side script, let's outline some of the functions that we're going to need for our chat room server. So you remember we're going to use threads here, and so threads have to target specific functions, and so we're going to write the function definition here to begin with. So first, we can kind of think of this chat room as different clients talking to each other. I'm sorry, we can't think of this chat room as clients talking to directly one another, right? Rather, all clients are going to talk to the server, and then the server will essentially forward messages to the other clients, okay? So the server is going to serve as like an intermediary between all of our connected clients. Messages are going to come into the server, and then the server is going to route those messages to their specific location, the specific client that they're supposed to go to. So, this should hopefully make sense because our clients are not connecting to other clients. They're connecting to the server, and every single client is connected to the same server. So our server needs to be able to receive an incoming message. It needs to receive, in fact, it just needs to receive any number of incoming messages, and it needs to be able to broadcast or send those incoming messages to all of the clients that are currently connected. So let's outline a function for like each of those functionalities. So first, we'll do a broadcast message function, which will take in one parameter, a message that is to be broadcast. So we'll say def broadcast message, and it'll take in one parameter, a message that is to be broadcast. So we'll put a quick doc string here, kind of describing the functionality of this. We'll say send a message to all clients connected to the server. And then we'll simply just say pass here for right now. We'll worry about writing this later on. Next, we'll have a receive message function that will take in one particular parameter. It will take in a client socket that we are trying to receive a given message from. So we'll say def receive message, and we'll pass in here a client socket. And so in here, we'll just put a docstring again, receive an incoming message from a specific client, and forward the message to be broadcast. So we'll add that in here. And for right now, we'll just say pass. So you can imagine, right, if you think about our previous server scripts, the server waited for an incoming connection, and when that incoming connection occurred, we accepted it, and we got the socket of the connecting client. So you can imagine every time we have someone connect, we are going to run this receive message function in a thread, and we'll pass in the socket that just connected. So we're always going to be listening for incoming messages here. And lastly, we'll have one that is connect client. So we will have a function here that is going to connect a given client. So, and this will take no parameters. So we'll just say def connect client, no parameters in here, but our docstring will say connect an incoming client to the server. So you might imagine that we're going to have a thread where we're always listening for incoming connections. So for right now, we'll just say pass. So this looks pretty good here. We've got our functions kind of mapped out nicely. We've got a good setup here for the server script. Let's head over to our client script right now. So I'm just going to save this, and we'll come over to our client script. Inside of our client script, the first thing that we'll do here initially is we will import the socket module and the threading module. All right, so now we have access to them. And the next thing that we'll do is we'll define our constants in a similar manner that we did for our server. So I'll just say define constants to be used, and so I'll have a destination IP socket.getHostByName, and then inside of here I'll do socket.getHostName. All right, perfect. Then we have a destination port, and I'll set that to be 12345. We'll do an encoder, and we'll set that to be UTF-8. And then we'll specify our byte size just to be 1024, because we're not really too worried about that for right now. All right, good. With all of these defined, let's now create our client socket. So we'll say create a client socket, and we will use IPv4 and TCP again. And so we'll call this client socket is equal to socket, the socket module, and then we'll call socket. So socket.socket. And then in here, we'll pass in our two protocols. So socket.af_inet and socket.sockstream. Oh, I think I made that same mistake before. There we go. All capital letters on those things. Now that we've had this this client socket, we are going to connect to the server socket that is at our specified destination IP and destination port address. So we'll call the client socket .connect. We'll call the .connect method. And inside here, we're going to pass a tuple that specifies where we should connect to. So we'll say destination IP and destination port. Okay, so that I think is pretty great here for the setup. Why don't we just quickly outline what the client needs to do, similarly to what we did with the server. So the client, if you think about it, the client needs to be able to send a message to the server, which is then eventually going to be broadcast for all clients to read. And then it also needs to be able to receive a message from the server whenever the server is broadcasting another client's message. So really, we need two functions here. So this is easy enough. Let's outline this right now. So we'll say def send message, and we'll say no parameters, and we'll just put a docstring here. Send a message to the server to be broadcast. All right, perfect, and we'll pass for right now. And then we'll say def receive message, and we'll put a little docstring in here, receive, and we'll say an incoming message from the server. And we'll say pass here. And I'm going to simply just save this right now. Okay, so I think our setups here are complete. So our client socket is created. We've got some functionality we'll work on. The client should be able to send a message from the server, and it should be able to receive a message, or send a message to the server, receive a message from the server. And our server is all set up here, and the server should be able to connect a given client. Once that client is connected, it should listen for incoming messages. It should receive those messages. And then once it gets a message, it is going to broadcast or essentially send that specific message to all other clients connected to the server. So you can imagine if one client types, "Hey everybody, how's it going?" every client connected to the server will then get that message. All right, I think this is a great place to stop. We got a nice kind of skeleton here set up that we can kind of fill in our next couple of videos where we'll begin coding this functionality. So I'll see you in that next video. Hello and welcome back. Now that we have outlined our client and server scripts, let's work on filling in some of their functionality. So we're going to start with the server script here, and more focused, let's start with connecting clients to our server. So we're going to work on the connect client function right here. So let me remove this pass here. And so we'll start by saying we want to always be listening for incoming connections. So just like before, we're going to use an infinite while loop. So I'll say while true. All right, and so now what do we want to do inside of this infinite while loop? Well, we'll begin by accepting an incoming connection. And if you recall, when we get an incoming connection, we're returned the socket that has just connected and then the address of the connection. So we're going to store both of these into some variables. And then we'll just simply print a statement verifying the connection on the server end. So we'll put a comment here. We'll say accept accept any incoming client connection. And so I'll store my information here, client socket and client address, and we'll get that information by calling our server socket. So server socket dot accept. So we're going to call the accept method on the server socket that we created right here, and that will give us the socket that connected and then the address that connected. All right, and then now that we have that information, let's just print some verification to the server here. So we'll print, and I'll use an F string, and I'll say connected with, and then we'll pass in the client address here. Okay, perfect. So I think that looks pretty good. And I'll do ... to make it look, I don't know, maybe make it just look better here. Okay, so that looks great. So now that we have a connection, let's try to get some information from the client. In particular, we're going to try to get their name. So if you think about this, we're eventually going to be broadcasting all information through this server. So if we have like 10 clients connected to us, we need to keep track of who has sent which message. And so thankfully, we have two lists that are going to help us with this, right? We defined client socket list, and then we defined client name list here. And really, so what we'll do is every time we get a socket, we're going to append it to this list, and every time we get that socket's name or the user's name, we'll append it to this list. So the socket and the name are always going to be at the same index, right? And that's going to help us out quite a bit. So I think the first thing we need to do is inform the client that we want their name to be sent along. We somehow have to inform the client that, hey, you got to send us our name. And so we're going to do this using a flag or a message that has a very specific purpose. So we're going to send the string name all in capital letters, and then on the client end, we're going to check to see if our incoming messages that we're getting from the server has this flag. And if it does so, we're going to ask the client to send their name along. So let's put a comment here, and we'll start by saying send a name flag to prompt the client for their name. So we want to send some information to the socket that just joined. So we're going to type in client socket.send, and then what do we want to send? Well, we're going to send the word name, and of course don't forget that we have to encode the string here to a bytes object, and we're going to use our dedicated encoder that we defined right up here. So we are using UTF-8. So we'll call there's our string name, and we'll call .encode, and we'll pass in our encoder. All right, wonderful. And so now that should work out quite nicely. So what we would expect to then get, hopefully, is we're going to expect that the client sends their name back to us. So why don't we receive that name? So we've just sent some information. This is essentially going to somehow prompt the client to send us their name. So now let's wait for that name to come in. So we'll call this client name. and we will get information from our client socket. So client socket.receive. And if you recall here, we have to specify the largest size of data that we are expecting, which is going to be our byte size variable, which we have defined. And then we also need to decode this. So we encode to send, we decode to receive, and we'll pass in our encoder. Perfect. So now if we have a client socket information and we have the client's name, right? We've got this client socket right here, and we're going to get the client name. So we should now append these to the appropriate lists. So let's do that right now. So we're going to come over here, down here, and we'll say add new client socket and client name to appropriate lists. So we'll call our client socket list client socket list dot append, and we'll pass in our client socket. So maybe our first client socket will be at index 0, and then we get that name, so client name list dot append, and then we'll pass in client name, and maybe that is Mary, and so the client socket at index 0 will correspond to the client name at index 0. So it'll match up quite nicely for us. Okay, awesome. So now let's update some information. We'll start with our server terminal to show information, in particular the name of the client that has just connected. Then we'll send a message to our new client to maybe confirm the connection. And lastly, we will broadcast a message to all other clients informing everyone of the new connection. So like if there's 5 other people already in our chat room and someone joins, we will then say, hey everybody, Mary has just joined the chat, and everybody will get that information. So let's write that out right now while we're inside of here. So we'll say update the server, individual client, and all clients. All right, so we'll print, we'll use an F string. This will print to the server, so we'll say name of new client is, and then we'll put in their client name. Right, and then I'll do a new line character here. So that will go to the server, and maybe I'll just put a comment here, server. All right, and then let's update the individual client that just joined to let them know that, hey, your connection was successful. So we'll do client socket.send. We're going to send the client socket that just joined some information, and let's send it a string that says, we'll do an F string, and we'll say, we'll use their name that they send along, client name. Comma, you have connected to the server, exclamation point. And then we will encode this using our encoder. Perfect. So that will be for the individual client. So I'll say individual client. And then let's do something that will go to all clients. And so to send a message to all clients, we are going to use the broadcast message function here, which we haven't yet written, but we know what it's going to do, right? The broadcast message function is going to send a specific message to every single client that is connected to the server. So let's call that broadcast message function, and let's pass in, if we look, we said broadcast message requires 1 argument. It requires a string message. So let's pass that in right here. So we'll say, what do we want to say here? We'll say, I think we'll do the exact same, well, similar. We'll do an F string, and we'll say client name has joined the chat. So we'll say that they have joined the chat, and then we'll call .encode, and we'll pass in our given encoder. Okay, so that looks really great here. What are we doing on time? This video is at about 8 minutes. I think we can, we're going to continue on here because our server looks pretty good for right now where I want it to be. Let's head over to our client now, and let's try to take care of handling of some of these incoming messages from the server, such as like our name flag. So we're going to want to take care of this in the receive message function here, right? We're receiving information, and we want to check to see if we have a name flag. So we're going to want to constantly receive messages. So we're going to put this inside of an infinite while loop again. So I'll say while true. And what we'll do is we'll use a try except block here to handle any errors for us. So I'll say while true, try, and what do we want to try? Well, we're going to receive an incoming message from the server. So let's get the incoming message. So we'll say message is equal to the client socket dot receive, and maximum size is our byte size variable, and then we will decode that using our encoder. And now we're going to check to see that message that we just got, that we just decoded. If it is a name flag, well, then we know that the server wants our name, and so we should prompt the client to give the name. So we'll just put a little comment here. We'll say check for the name flag, else show the message. So we'll say if the message that we received is equal to our name flag, all capital letters, then that means the server wants our name. So we're going to store it in a variable, and we'll use the input function to get it, and we'll say, what is your name? Now that we have that name, let's send the name back to the server. So we're going to take our client socket, and we'll call the send method. So we'll send it through our socket. And what are we sending? We're sending our name, but we need to encode it. So we'll say name.encode using our encoder. Awesome. So I think that's going to work pretty nicely. Otherwise, if the flag is not name, if the flag is just a regular old message, let's print the message to the screen. So we'll say print message. Perfect. So that's going to be our try block. Let's just do some error handling here by putting an except block here. So except, and then we'll say here, we'll just say an error occurred. Close the connection. All right. So we'll just say print an error occurred ... for right now, and then we'll do client socket.close. We'll close the connection, and we'll break out of our infinite while loop. Perfect. So I guess to test what we have so far, we need to, in our client script, we actually need to call this receive message function. So down here I'll say start the client. And so to start our client, we simply just need to call receive message. All right, so that will start RECIEVE. All right, so that will start our client, and then we actually have to go back and I think start our server. So on our server here, what do we need to do to start the server? We are just going to simply call the connect client method here. So I'll come down here at the bottom of my code, and we'll say start the server, and we'll print a message maybe indicating that we're starting to listen to connection. So we'll say server is listening for incoming connections, ... and then I'll put a new line character here, and then we will call our connect client function, which is going to just continuously run given this while loop. All right, so let's test this out. So I'm going to run this. I run my server. Let me stop it for a second. Okay, let's run this again. All right, server is listening for incoming connections. I'll run my client. All right, the client is prompted. It says, what is your name? If we come over here, it says that we are connected with 192.168.1.7 using port 51720. So let's come over here and let's put in our name. My name is Mike. All right, it says, Mike, you have connected to the server, so that's great. And if we come back over here, name of new client is Mike. So it looks like the information is getting passed from one place to the next, and that's working out really nice. So if we look here, our server, right, we're in this infinite while loop, so we connected a client right here using the accept method. We got all of that information, and when that's done, what are we doing now? Well, we're back up here, and we're just waiting for another incoming connection. And so our program is essentially going to hang here, but it's not going to be an issue because we're going to use threading to take care of receiving and broadcasting our messages. So we'll look at maybe how we go about doing some of that in our next video. I think this is a great place to stop, and I will see you then. Hello, and welcome back. So far, we have the ability to connect a client to our server and simply receive messages, right? Like we can send our name and get confirmation that we have joined the server. So let's next add the ability to send multiple pieces of information to the server. And this is where we need to use threading. We want our client to be able to do two operations concurrently. That is, receive messages as they come in and send messages as they need to go out. And so we'll create two threads and run each function on its own thread. So let's create these threads right now. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of my program and on the client script. And before you could see we were just starting the client by typing receive message. I'm going to get rid of that. And instead, I'm going to create threads to continuously, sure, that's good enough, send and receive messages. That's going to bother me. I should probably spell this more correctly. Continuously. Did I spell that right? I don't know at this point. It's okay. So we're going to send and receive. So remember, when we're creating a thread, you have to give a target function to run when the thread starts. So we're going to create a thread. I'll call it receive thread, and we'll call threading.thread. And our target function here, target, will be the receive message function. And then let's create another thread for sending. So we'll say send thread is equal to threading.thread. And in here, our target is going to be our send message function. Perfect. So now to start the client, rather than calling the receive function, which is going to essentially, stop or halt the rest of our main program until this thing is done, we are going to call the threads. So we'll start, I should not call the threads, we're going to start the threads. So we are going to call receive thread.start, and we'll call send thread.start. Perfect. So we've started our two threads. So now we should be able to send and receive information at the same time. With this in place, let's head up to our send message function. So I'm going to scroll up here and let's work on this. Here we will simply get the message from the user, from the client, and then send it along to our server. And we want this to continuously run, right? It's going to run on its own thread. We've got the send thread here and we want this to continuously run to listen for incoming messages from the user. So we're going to use a while loop. So we'll say an infinite while loop, while true. And in here, we will simply get the message from the user and send it along. So we'll say message is equal to input, and I won't do much of a prompt here. We'll just leave it as a blank string. And then whatever we type in, we'll send that. So we'll say client-socket.send message.encode, and we'll use our default encoder. So this is just going to loop forever. It's going to get input from the user constantly and then send it along. Get the next input, send it along. Next input, and send it along. Awesome. So I think our client for right now looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. Why don't we save this and let's head over to our server. So we'll come over here to our server, and here let's talk about the potential threads that we need in the server. Well, we have this connect client function that we're sort of running here, which is going to connect any given client. And once we connect a client, right, so we've connected a client, we've accepted the connection, we've gotten their name, we've added the connected socket and name to our lists, and we've let everybody know that it has happened. What we should now probably do is create a thread that is going to continuously allow us to receive messages from that client. And so, right, if you think about it, we have this receive message function. We want this function to run for every single client that we have here. So we should be running this in a thread. So let's add that thread right now. So I'm going to come down here after we update our server. We'll say now that a new client has connected, start a thread. So we'll call this our receive thread here, receive thread, and it will equal threading.thread, and our target is going to be receive message. All right, perfect. Now, here we've got one problem though. If we look, if I just go back to our client, when we created our threads for the receive and send threads are our targets functions where receive and send messages, and neither of them took in any arguments, right? There are no arguments here. But when we come over here to our server and we look at the receive message function, we are taking in an argument. So we're taking in the client socket. So how do we pass that argument along here in the target of our thread? So the syntax is something like this. We use the args keyword to do this. So there's my target. I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to type args equals, and then I have to pass all of the arguments as a tuple. And so I'll say in parentheses client socket, and then a comma. And so the comma just indicates, I think the end of this first argument. And so now when we start this thread, we've got the target, and we're passing in the arguments that this target function then needs. Okay, perfect. So why don't we now go up and, we should probably start the thread, right? We defined the thread, so we should start the thread. So we'll say receive thread.start. All right, awesome. So now once we get a connection, we'll go through, we'll get all that information, we'll start a thread listening for incoming messages from that connection, and then if you look, that thread's just going to run, and then we're back up here waiting to connect for more clients. So this should hopefully work out pretty nicely. So why don't we go and write this receive message function right now. So if we come up here to our receive message function, I'll get rid of the word pass. Oops, and I got to make sure that I'm back in there. So first, we want this function to continuously run on its individual thread forever, right? So we're going to use a while loop. So we'll say while true, just like we did before. And we'll use a try except block for error handling. So we'll say try. And first, we'll get the name of the given client. And then we'll get the index of the given client socket. So we have that information, right? So we have these stored in our specific list right here. So we'll come up here and we'll just say index, or I'll say get the name of the given client. So index is equal to client socket list dot index. We'll call the index method on our list, and we'll pass in the given client socket. All right, so whatever client socket we have, we're going to find its index in this list. So if it's at like index 4, well, then the name of this list in index 4 is going to be the corresponding name, so we can get the name. So we'll say name is equal to client name list, and we'll pass in the given index. Awesome. So now we have the name of that person here. So now what we should do is let's receive a message from the client socket. So we'll put a little comment here. We'll say receive message from the client. So we'll say message is equal to our client socket dot receive. We'll specify the maximum byte size. Byte size, and then we'll call dot decode and pass in our default encoder. Now that we have that message, let's just format, I think, that message a little nicer, right? Because if you look here, the message that's going to be coming in, it's just a blank like input, right? So someone might type like, hey, how are you doing, right? Hey, how are you doing? They might type that in, and we don't want to just say, hey, how are you doing as our message that we're going to display. Instead, we want to format it to include the name of the client that just sent that message. So let's format that string. So I'm going to get rid of this. We'll come back over here and we'll format our string. So we'll say, we'll update message and say, okay, I'm going to use an F string here. We'll put their name and then a colon and then the message. And right here, what we're going to do is we are going to eventually send this message to the broadcast function, which is going to broadcast or send it to every client that is there. So I'm going to encode it right now. I might as well encode it. So encode, and we'll pass in our default encoder. All right, so now that the message has been formatted and encoded, let's send it to our broadcast message function. So broadcast message, and we'll send in the given message. So again, we haven't written this yet, but we know, like, if I have like 10 clients, I'm going to get the message from one specific client. I'll format it so it has their name, and then I'm going to broadcast that new message to all 10 clients that are on the server. All right, so now let's actually just handle our error messages here. So we'll say except And here, what should we do? So if it doesn't work, there was an error. So if there's an error here, we're going to handle this by simply removing the client and letting everyone know that they essentially were kicked off of the chat. I guess it's kind of a rough way to deal with it, but we'll that's how we're going to handle it. So we'll first say, okay, find the index of the client socket in our lists. Okay, so we're going to find the index of our client socket, similar to what we did up here in our try block. So we'll say, okay, we'll do index is equal to client socket list dot index client socket, and then let's get their name is equal to client name list square brackets index. All right, now that we have that name, let's go ahead and remove the client socket and the name from our list. So we'll say remove the client and we'll say client socket and name from lists. So we'll do client socket list dot remove, and then we'll pass in our given client socket, and then we'll do client name list dot remove, and we'll pass in our given name. So now we've pulled them out of our lists. So now let's close that client socket. So we'll say close the client socket. So we'll say client socket.close. So that will close the connection, essentially kicking that client who gave us an error. And then what we should probably do is we should probably broadcast to everybody else that's in the chat that that person has left the chat room. So we'll say broadcast that the client has left the chat. So we'll call our broadcast message function, and in here we'll use an f string. We'll say name has left the chat, and of course we'll encode, and we'll pass in our default encoder. And then once we get that error, right, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to break this infinite while loop so that this thread, which we called right here when we actually formed the connection with our client, that thread will stop. So we'll come down here and then we'll say break. All right, I think we're almost done here. Why don't we just quickly, we've talked a lot about our broadcast message function. Why don't we just quickly write our broadcast message function? And this is going to be really pretty easy here. If we think about it, we have a list of all of our client sockets that are connected to the server. What we need to do is simply loop through that list and send whatever message we pass to the broadcast message to each and every single client socket. So inside of here, I'm just going to say for client socket in client socket list. Let's grab the individual client socket, so client socket dot send, and we'll pass in whatever message we send in here. And I think we don't have to encode it here because we are encoding our message right here when we're formatting it. I guess we can do that. Why not, right? I kind of like it doing it that way, so we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good place to stop. In our next video, we'll put some finishing touches on these programs here, and then we'll test it out. So I look forward to seeing you then. Hello and welcome back. In our last video, we added threading to our projects to run specific functions concurrently, and this is going to allow us to have our client or server send and receive messages continuously and let multiple clients connect to our server. So we wrote all this functionality, but we didn't test it. So why don't we test it out right now? And I think it'll be best for us if I just come over here and run this in our terminal. So I'm going to come over to the directory where we've been working. My terminal chat room, I've got our client and server scripts right here. So I'm going to open up a new terminal, and I will run python server.py. All right, and it says listening for incoming connections, so that's working out nicely here. And then let's run some clients and let's see what happens here. So I'll run a client, python client.py, enter your name. I'll put my name in as Mike. So there's our first client. Let's run a second client. Let's see what happens. Now, we couldn't connect a second client in our kind of really basic two-way chat, but let's see if we can do it here now with threading. So python client.py, we get another one. Let's put in, we'll do Mary here. So it says Mary has joined the chat. And if you look, Did Mike get an update on that? Yes, he did. So it says Mary has joined the chat here in Mike's window. And let's make it a party. We'll put a third person in here to talk. And so we'll run one more here, python-client.py, and let's add Bob. So Bob has joined the chat as well. So now let's move our 3 clients here so we can kind of see what's going on. So let's have Mike say something. Hey, everyone, what is up? And hopefully that when I hit enter, that message is going to be sent to the server. And you can see the server has all of the information, Mike, Mary, Bob, and their respective IP addresses. And you can see each one is using a different port for the connection. Since I'm doing this all on my same computer here, just so we can record the video, which is kind of funny. So when I hit enter, the message is going to go to the server, and then the server is going to broadcast it out to everyone. And so you can see right there, I sent the message, hey, everyone, what's up? The server formatted it, so it has my name included, Mike, and then it broadcast the message to everyone connected. So that worked out really nice. Nothing, what's up with you? All right, perfect, Mary and Bob. This is super cool. All right, so everything's working out nice. But for me, it's kind of hard to distinguish maybe what has been sent via the broadcast from the server versus what I'm typing. So maybe we got to do something about that. And then I'm able to say I have to leave. See ya. All right, so Mike's going to leave. So if I close out, it says Mike has left the chat. Mike has left the chat. Bob has left the chat. Perfect. And so then we can close out of our server. And things are working pretty cool. I do think there's a couple of things that we can do just to make this a little bit better. And really, I mean, we're done. Everything works great. The last thing that I want to do is purely cosmetic. So I want to format any incoming message that is coming from the server, right, via the broadcast, so that they look a little bit different. I want them to be a different color. I'm going to have them be like greenish color to sort of simulate like an old school computer terminal. And we're going to like tab them in so that they're aligned a little bit differently. And so to change the color here, we're going to use ANSI escape codes. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of thought, hey, I wanted to give this a shot, and I had no idea how to do it. Set this up. So where are we formatting our message that is going to be sent to the broadcast? So this is in my server script. So you can see when we get a message from the client, we get that message right here. What we're going to do is we're going to format it right here so that we change its color to be green and bold. So inside of my F string, I'm going to use the ANSI escape character \033 square brackets. I'll put a 1 to bold it, a semicolon, and then a 92 to make it green, and I'll put an M to indicate that that's done. Now what I also want to do right here is I said I want to shift these messages in so that they're tabbed in. This isn't part of the ANSI escape character, it's just a \T to add some white space. However, what will happen here is I've now changed the styling effects of my terminal. And if I don't reset the stylings, all of the subsequent text in the terminal is going to be styled this way, so bold and bright green. I definitely don't want that to happen, so at the end of this string right here, I'm going to reset the effects by calling the ANSI escape character again, \033 square brackets, and then I'll simply pass a 0 to reset. So that should work out sort of nicely here. One thing that we can also do is when someone leaves, why don't we change the font styling of that broadcast message when someone leaves. So when someone leaves or someone gets kicked, if we look, it's right down here in our accept block. We send a broadcast message that that specific person has left the chat. So let's color that like red and let's make it blinking. So if I come to this resource here, a font effect, I guess we have a slow blink or a rapid blink. Although rapid blink says it's not widely supported, so we'll do a slow blink of 5. And then what is red? Red is going to be, bright red is 91, so we'll do 91. So let's add that option in here. So we'll do, at the beginning of our F string, \033, open square brackets, a 5 for the slow blink, and then a 91M to specify our bright red color. We don't want everything to be styled that way, so at the end of this string, we're going to do \033 again, square brackets, and then we'll do 0M to essentially like reset that. All right, I think that is pretty good. One of the things I think we're doing here, if you look, before we run this, inside of this infinite while loop, every time we run the try block, we're getting the index and the name of the person, and every time we're running the accept block, we're getting the index and name. I don't think those are going to No, those might change. Yeah, we got to keep them in here. I was going to say let's move them outside of this while loop, but I don't think that's a good idea, because if we move them outside of the while loop and someone leaves, then we're removing them from the list. So I think the index is going to change. So that would become an issue if we did that. So let's leave that the way it is, okay? So I'll save this. Our client script we didn't make any changes to, so let's see if the coloring effects are going to look pretty cool for us and add a nice little element to our program. So we'll open up a terminal here and we'll call server.py. So there's our server, which is just going to give us our incoming connections and help facilitate our communication. And now let's run Python client.py. Let's do Dan. All right, so there's Dan. Dan joined the chat. Let's open up another one. Here's another client. We'll do Jan. All right, Jan joined the chat. And then let's do one more. And we'll add another client. Let's see, we got Dan, we got Jan. How about Ran? Sure, Ran. And Ran has joined the chat. Okay, so let's see if when we send some messages here, will they be formatted the way we want them? So I'll say, hey, everyone here. And that's kind of cool. So it's tabbed in. It's nice and spaced out. So now this is super cool. If Dan continues to send messages, how awesome is green? We can see that it's formatted really nicely. And so then over here, yeah, this rocks. We'll just say, perfect. So Jan can put it in, super cool, and then Ran can put it in. So now let's just say Ran's got to leave. Hey, I have to go. And Ran leaves. We should see a red message get broadcast here that is hopefully slow blinking. So it says Ran has left the chat. All right, that looks pretty cool. And we are slow blinking, which is kind of neat. Awesome. I have to go to. All right, and so maybe, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tab that in. It'll be the last thing that we do. I'll just tab that in before we exit. So if I come back over to my code, in my server, so we're on our server and we're in the receive message right here, I'm just going to put a /T to give the same spacing so that they are in fact aligned. And we don't have to test that again. I won't put you through it, but that will just align everything a little bit nicer here. Perfect. So this seems to be working great. I'm really happy with how this project worked out, and it's a nice project that hopefully solidified your understanding of sockets and helped you learn some of the fundamentals of threading. So we're going to continue to introduce more modules and libraries to really expand on our chat room idea in upcoming videos, because I think that this just to learn this concept of a chat room is a great tool to help build up our knowledge. So we'll start that in our next couple of videos there, and I can't wait to see you then.